So I decided to do my piece on influences from the Salem witch trials and other controversial art from that time period. Um, my piece is called The Witching Hour. As an introduction to the piece, the Salem witch trials were in the late 1600s. It's where mass hysteria caused several individuals to be tried as witches. Um, these individuals were regular people, but due to thoughts of them being different and odd occurrences surrounding their differences, they were tried as witches. Several of them were hung and killed. I don't know that I necessarily believe that witches do not exist. I do believe in the supernatural and the occult, so it's quite possible that maybe they were actual witches, but that does not necessarily mean a bad thing. Then in the 1900s, immigration into the Americas brought traditions of what we now know as Halloween. And people were still hesitant to be linked to these traditions in the Americas just because it was still considered very controversial at the time to be tied to anything demonic or occult. Even though the traditions had nothing to do with this, that's how the people saw it. Similarly to the witch trials, even though the women weren't practicing black arts or dark magics, that's what people associated them with. My first controversial art piece is Witch's Sabbath, The Great He-Goat by Francisco Goya. Um, and my second piece is The Nightmare by Henry Fusel. These depict both demonic presences and witches, and they were very controversial for the time. They played on the fears of the people and the unknown of the occult. And that's what made them very controversial for their time. The Witch's Sabbath, The Great Goat by Francisco Goya. This piece belonged to the Romanticism movement. It's hard to think of this type of piece as romantic or romanticism, but the artist was unafraid to explore the occult, even though it was very controversial at this time. This piece gave me the main idea for my own creative piece, following the idea that went against the norm of creating a controversial piece. I feel this fits with, of course, given that his imagery was very controversial during that period, and it is still controversial to this day as it deals with religion and the occult. Anything depicting demonic presence or anything dark tends to be viewed in a negative light. I don't necessarily see it that way. I see things as everything has a yin and a yang. There's a balance. So if you want to believe in the good and you want to believe in miracles and wonderful things happening in your life, there has to be a side to it, another side. And just because that side exists doesn't mean that you give in to it or that you're a follower of it or anything of that nature. It just means that it exists. Um, so that's just my take on that. And then the second piece, Nightmare Fuel, The Nightmare, 1781 by Henry Fusel. This piece, it kind of states it in the title itself. It's playing on the fears of people. So it belongs to the Sturm and Drang Romanticism movement. The artist used a blend of the occult and underlying sexual innuendo to create his controversial art. A lot of his pieces were this way, had some supernatural components and also some sexual components. As in this piece, you can see the demon on top of the woman, gives it kind of a sexual undertone, but also is kind of dark and can play on the fears of the supernatural. This piece, it lent to the fear and included the supernatural and how uncomfortable people are during this time with that, and not only with that, but also expressing sexuality and their own sexuality, especially in something as public as a painting that would be on display. So I think that's how this artist was controversial during his time. So then my piece, The Witching Hour, it was created using pencil and charcoal, and a few colored elements of colored pencil. It allowed me to do the shadow and contrast that I wanted in the piece. I think the dark charcoal black against the whitish background kind of lends to the contrast of good and evil, and puts into the piece that, of course, the dark is going to be the occult and the lighter contrast is going to be the good. And you can see that the witch that's hanging, not necessarily, I gave it kind of a smoky look because you don't really know whether she's good or evil. You know that people judged her and people hung her for their judgments, but can you ever truly know if she was a witch or if she was with intent of harming people? You just don't know. So in this piece, the witch that's hanging, of course, is deceased, and the demon or the devil is summoning her to come with him, and then she appears, her soul or spirit, which a lot of people believe that witches did not have, but appears behind the tree to follow him. And then there's the pentagram used to summon, and then the portal that they will open to return to the underworld. So I think this project is fitting with our class because, of course, like I said, anything religious, anything with the occult is still controversial to this day, and I feel that it will always be. It will always be something that's tried to be censored. Halloween is still something that's even censored by some religious groups and some parent groups that don't believe in these dark traditions for children, which I think Halloween is awesome. It's my favorite holiday, and so I wanted to incorporate something like that into my project. So in conclusion, I used a few quotes from articles we've read during this semester just to kind of tie it in. Those people who seek to destroy art testify to its power. They acknowledge that the words of art enter our deepest feelings and rouse our deepest emotions. What is feared is art's equivocal power, its meaningfulness, its aspirational and inspirational impact on people. I feel that a lot of fear from the Salem witch trials and still fear of the occult comes from the fact that people are different, and these women were different, and it went against what was normal for the people of Salem, and the fact that they thought they might have a supernatural power that made them a threat to the normalcy of their existence just caused that controversy. And of course you're going to fear something that's unknown, especially if you think that that unknown could potentially have some power over your life. But you don't want to destroy what makes that person different. You don't want to destroy the differences in our lives because that would just be boring. And then my second quote, it still could be argued, however, that exposure to controversial artworks could confuse young people about the criteria for making choices about morality. The fact that people feel like that Halloween could corrupt young minds or that children shouldn't participate in satanic holidays, that it might lead them to sin, just shows how powerful the fear of change or the fear of something different can be. And if you think that just a few images or a celebratory tradition of trick-or-treating or dressing up in a costume could cause that type of detriment to a person's morality, I mean, it just kind of goes to show that there are things beyond our power and things beyond our control that could alter our lives, and that in itself is just scary. And I think that trying to censor and ban is how people mitigate that fear. And then this is just my works cited for my quotes and my images.